University of South Asia. For more details, www.usa.edu.pk.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Now I'm going to give the lecture on the second half of analyzing the business markets. Let's see what we have to discuss in it. We are going to discuss the identifying the major forces that influence the business buying behavior. Before going further, I would be revising it a little bit. We now have an idea about the business market and their structure. We know that the buyers of the business markets are very fewer but larger. They make big decisions and they make big deals. We need to identify the major factors that influence the business buying behavior. We need to identify the 4 Ps. We need to identify the external environment that has to go into the buying center, who decides that what has to be bought. In business markets, we do have the trained people who are going to make the decisions, because whatever we are buying for the professionals, and for buying for the professional actually needs to have the people who are trained to buy them. So we need to list and define the steps in the business buying decision process, and we have to compare the institutional and the government markets. Let's see what we have. Major types of buying situations. Number 1 is the system selling. In the previous lecture, we have studied about the supplier selection. We have studied straight rebuy, where the companies buy the products with from one buyer, from one supplier, from one seller, and they do not they do not go for any modification. Whereas in modified rebuy, whenever companies get the option of a better price, of a better quality, they always take a decision and they go for a modified rebuying. Or if they want to change a model or a technological aspect, they go for a supplier who is actually giving it, and they modify the supplier or modify rebuying. Then the third one is the new task, which actually takes us back to the straight rebuy. In this entire situation, there's a major type of buying situations where the people want to buy product from one supplier. It involves the purchase of a packaged solution from a single seller. That entire system is being bought by that seller. The 2-step process of the selling. Number 1, interlocking the products, and number 2, system of production, inventory control, distribution, and other services to meet the buyer needs for a smooth running operations. These 2 steps actually guide us to define what products are we going to make, define what products, for what product we're going to get what, and it actually involves the system selling. We try to find that supplier who is actually having much things, and we can only, or we should only, or we need to only converse with one supplier in order to make this thing happen. Then there are certain participants in the business buying process. As an individual makes the decision, there are certain roles that the people perform. They are the initiators, they are the influencers, they are the role, they are the buyers, they are the people who use it. But in the buying behavior in the organizations, we need to identify the participants in the business buying process. As we know that in the business buying, we need to have people who are highly professional and who know exactly what is the need of the organization. I won't be forgetting the point over here that we need to identify that what is the basic need of the organization to be recognized and to be fulfilled. The entire decision making of the business buying happens in the buying center. A buying center is all the individuals and units that participate in the buying, because in the organization we do not buy for our own selves. We always buy for the people in the organization. For example, over here, if in an organization, if a certain department requires a certain product or a certain equipment, they would raise a point. They would raise a voice that we need a certain thing. That particular thing would go further on, and then it would be decided by the different people, and then it would be going to the person who's going to pay for that, and this is the entire stuff. So one person is not making a decision. See, in buying centers, who are the participants? They are the users. Basically, the first people are the users who actually call for a need. Then they are the influencers who knows that the users are not saying something which is wrong. If they will not influence the buying, the things would be in the lag. Then there are the buyers who pay the money. They are the deciders who decide that whether the product, from whom the product should be bought, because they take the invoices and they take the rate list from the different kind of the suppliers who are indulged in the certain certain transactions, and then they decide who is the best alternative to be transact from. And then there are the gatekeepers. Gatekeepers are those people who get the information and then transfer the information further on. Then buying center provides a major challenge. Who participates in the process? Their relative authority. What evaluation criteria each participant uses, because evaluation criteria also has to be formalized, also have to be gone through the different processes, because the quality measures, the product that we can afford, that always has to have an evaluation criteria that has to pass through the participants. And then there's the informal participants who basically are there to give their own perspective or their own choices or their own opinions. Let's see who are the participant users. Users are those that will use the product or service. Influencers are those people who help define the specifications and provide information for evaluating the alternatives. Help define the specifications that what the users would be using or need to use for the certain task to be performed, and then they evaluate the alternatives, that what alternatives do we have in our mind, in our hands. Then there are the buyers. Buyers have a formal authority to select the supplier and arrange terms of the purchase. They have the formal authority to select the supplier because they are the ones who are paying. Then the people who are paying for the certain transaction has got the authority to decide that who are the best or who suits us the best according to the money that we have. Then there are the deciders who have the formal or informal power to select and approve from the final suppliers, and they are the gatekeepers who control the flow of information, that what information should go inside the buying center or which should not go inside the buying center. They also evaluate the entire information themselves, and then they pass on to the deciders, then they pass on to the buyers, it goes to the influencers, and ultimately the users uses them. See, business buyer behavior has got the major influences on the business buyer. As in consumers, economic factors play a very vital role. Like in consumers, we have to see the segmentation. We need to see in the business buying that the business is basically catering which segment. What is their basic range to spend? In that regard, economic factor plays a very, very vital role where the prices are concerned and which services that you need to give to them. So in order to focus any business, for example, if you're making parts for the Honda Motors, you need to understand their economic factor as well, that in which car they want to have that particular part. If they want to have a part for a high-ended car, you need to support them in that regard. And if they want to make a car for a middle class, a middle level car, you need to make it economically available for that particular purpose. Then there are the personal factors. Personal factors always comes where the emotions of the organizations comes in, with the personality and the self-concept comes in, that how and what basically company is all about, how they perceive themselves as the personality into themselves. Major influence on the business buyer has got the environmental factors who are totally affecting them. Number one, demand for the product. Of course, it's a drive demand. If the consumer is demanding for that, demand is there. Then the economic outlook. The economic outlook of the country as well as the organizations itself, their goals, their objectives, their budgets, the cost of money at the place where you are transacting, the resources that are available with you. Because if you do not know what resources are available with you as an organization, how can you go further? Because organizations has to see each other. In the business buying, the buyer and the seller both are in the business, and they both need to look at each other from this perspective. Then the technology comes in, that which technology is actually suitable. Then the culture comes in, that in which particular place are you residing, because it is very eminent to find the suppliers from the same place where you are actually doing the business. Then the political aspect, which actually impacts the entire health of the organization. Their legal perspectives, everything has an impact on the organization health. And then there's a competition. Competition, who is competing with you in the frame of reference? In your frame of reference, who is competing with you? These environmental factors actually affect the decision making of the buying center as well, and upon the seller's point of view also. In this regard, also the business people or the business organizations need to do the SWOT analysis of themselves. They need to see what are their strengths. They need to figure out all the steps of strategic planning, because if they would not be identifying that, they would not be able to identify which kind of supplier do they need for the kind of transaction they need to make. Business buyer behavior has got the major influences on business buying organizational factors. What organizational factors are influencing? As I told you earlier, that the strategic planning is required over here. The objectives of the organizations need to be pinpointed, that what are the objectives of the organization itself. Organization needs to be very clear about their vision, about their mission statements. They need to be very specific about their objectives and goals. They need to define the policies which are basically there to abide by all the objectives that we are making, or which can help us achieving the objectives. Policies are basically do's and don'ts, and then the procedures which are being the procedures and the processes that we need to identify, because if you're not going to identify the procedures in the business firm, we won't be able to get the uniformity. And then the structure of the organization. What is the structure of the organization? How it goes about the different processes, and what are their systems, how they actually, what is their business concept, what are their business models, and how they are basically structured. Are they having the structure like they do have their decentralized structures or the centralized structure, and then they should have a proper systems to ensure all the things that we have studied above. Then there are the major influences on the business buyers where the interpersonal factors are concerned. Motives are somehow derived by the needs of the organization. You are motivated to buy something of which you are having a need of. Then the perceptions are also very, very important. Perceptions of the market, perception of one buyer in front of the other seller, and then the preferences. What preferences? These things has to be focused by the seller company, that what is the age, income, age of the buyer's company, which age they are focusing at, so what kind of a raw material they would be requiring, the income perspective of the places, the education level of the segment, and the attitude towards the risk. These all things need to be identified by the seller company, and the buyer company needs to identify itself as well. The buying process involves, the first problem is to recognize the problem. It is very important. Without recognizing a problem, we won't go ahead. We cannot go ahead. We need to be motivated by identifying by some kind of a need, so that we move on to get something to satisfy that. So the problem recognition occurs when someone in the company recognizes a problem or a need. For example, internal stimuli goes for need for new product or production equipment, because maybe production is not going up to the mark and we need something new or some new production equipment. Then there's external stimuli. That's an idea from a trade show or an advertising that can guide us to innovate something new or do something new to improve ourselves. Then there's a general need. Description describes the characteristics and quantity of the item needed, and then their production or a product specification that describes the technical criteria. General need describes that what generally this item is going to be used for and what is the benefit of its use, because benefit is very important to be analyzed. Then the product specification that describes the technical criteria of the product, that what technicalities are being required by this particular thing. After getting these things, how technically we are going to get sound. Then there are the value analysis, which is an approach to cost reduction. We need to evaluate the value because we need to reduce the cost in order to be profitable, where components are studied to determine if they can be redesigned, standardized, or made with less costly methods of production. We need to produce the value analysis, because at the end of the day we need to have profitable relationship, or it is done through big sales or by reducing the cost. Supplier search is the next part, where you have to involve compiling a list of qualified suppliers who are in the game or who are having this option to sell you. Then there is proposal solicitation, which is a process of requesting proposals from the qualified suppliers whom you think are the cream of the market, and you need to take their bids, that what they have to offer to you after going through your problem or your need. Supplier selection is the process when the buyer center creates a list of desired supplier attributes and negotiates with preferred suppliers for favorable terms and conditions. It is very eminent for the organization to do the homework first, that what kind of supplier do they need, so that the supplier they hire should be knowing about what their whims are, what their perspectives are. So order routine specification is the final order with the chosen supplier that you have straightly rebought your supplier, and there it goes that it lists all the specification and terms of the purchase. Then performance reviews involves a critique of supplier performance with the purchase terms. See, it is very important for the organization to have a self-audit, because we say that in market the micro environment is something that is controllable and suppliers are the part of the micro market. So in this regard, we need to check that once the suppliers do their job, we try to evaluate their entire activity so that we should be knowing where the rectification is required. Then there's an e-procurement. E-procurement is something to get the products through the electronic media. Online purchasing is something becoming very, very common and very much in the trend, in which the company buying sites have been built and they try to take the orders online, and they have facilitated the consumer in order to make them feel comfortable while sitting at their workplaces or home, and they can order the company and they can see the estimate. And then the extranet perspective. Extranet somehow the other, sometimes the inventory at the retail store goes low, and before it becomes vanished, through the extranet we are attached with our suppliers. The mails go there and they make the transports, fill the trucks, and they send it to the required places, so that the customers should not get affected, and they should actually be providing the right thing at the right time by using the technology. Then there are the e-procurement advantages. There are the advantage that you have got an access to the new suppliers, because you can, since it's a global world, we need to be globalized in getting the orders. Then there's a lower cost, because you don't have to go anywhere. You have to sit on the computer and use the internet, and you can get the know-how about the suppliers. The speed, order processing and delivery, it shares the information, it sales and service and support. Whereas the disadvantages can erode relationship as buyers search for the new suppliers. See, in the supplier selection, we always cherish the moment of the straight rebuy. If the straight rebuy is affected, of course our relationships are affected. If we are going to give some good order to someone else rather than our old supplier, it may create the tension in the relationship. And we all know that the partner relationship is very important for going ahead in the market. So we need to learn the ropes in order to cater these situations. Then there are institutional markets, which consist of hospitals, nursing homes and prisons that provide goods and services to people in their care characteristics. They have low budgets and they're captive audience. You see, institutional markets are also a very important market, and they may have lesser money, but they buy things in the large quantities. For example, the nursing homes need to have beds. We need to see that where the beds are being produced, the suppliers will give them the quotation, they will decide upon it, and of course they have got the low budgets, but the fewer the more. It's like that. They would take the order and they would make it for this industrial market, and in other words, they will actually produce their marketing word of mouth going far from the boundaries of the country. The next part is the government markets, which tend to favor domestic suppliers and require suppliers to submit bids and normally award to the lowest bidder, which actually happens. The tender, actually, you might have heard the name of the tenders. Tenders goes in the market and it's been issued by the government markets, and they carefully monitor if they are affected by similar environmental factors. It has to have, if you work with the government, you have a good credits. You have non-economic factors, you have a minority suppliers, you're a depressed supplier, or you're a small business. So government markets tend to favor domestic suppliers and require suppliers to submit bids. It is very important to give rise to this one negative example though, but in Nawaz Sharif's government, we actually ordered the cars from Japan, which actually hindered the supplier and the car dealers over here in Pakistan. This is all for now. The business markets that you have covered has told you or has made you learn about the buying process, the roles, the buying center participants, that institutional, what are institutional markets, what are government markets. So this is all about analyzing the business markets, and once you understand the entire gist, we can make our negotiations easy with the business markets. Till then, thank you very much.
University of South Asia. For more details, www.usa.edu.pk